Let's kick things off with a pretty wild thought experiment. One that's genuinely scientific, but yeah, a little speculative. What if we just disappeared? If humanity vanished from the planet, who would take our place? It's a huge question, and it really forces you to look at evolution in a completely different way.
And just to be clear, we're not talking about some post-apocalyptic movie plot here. No, this is actually a serious look at evolutionary potential. What we're searching for is a species that has that perfect cocktail of traits, right? The right amount of intelligence, the right kind of dexterity, and a complex enough social life that, given a few million years, they might just develop true sapience and build a civilization of their own.
So, who's the prime candidate? Well, a ton of research is pointing in a very unexpected direction. It's not another primate, it's not a dolphin, it's a creature most of us just see as a common pest. Yeah, we're talking about the common raccoon. And believe me, the evidence for why they could be next in line, it's way more compelling than you might think. So to really get why raccoons are the frontrunners, we've got to start by looking at our own backyard. Literally. See, the modern city, it turns out it's more than just a place for humans. It's actually a supercharged engine for evolution. Yeah, there's this fascinating new field called eco-evolutionary dynamics, and it's showing us something incredible. The animals in our cities, they aren't just learning to cope with us. They're actually evolving right down to their genes. Think of it like Darwinism on fast forward. The constant pressure of city life is forcing these rapid, real, and measurable changes in entire populations. Okay, so this brings us to a really key idea. It's called the cognitive buffer hypothesis. And the core idea is pretty simple. Having a big brain acts like a buffer. It helps you deal with new, chaotic environments because you can be more flexible and come up with new solutions. And honestly, what's a more chaotic new environment than a human city? And here's the kicker. Studies are showing that city raccoons, the ones facing all these new challenges, actually have a higher encephalization quotient, that's basically a measure of brain size relative to body size, than their cousins out in the country. And what's happening here isn't like how we domesticated dogs. This is something else entirely. It's called passive selection. Think about it. In a city, which raccoons are going to do the best? Not the skittish ones. It's the calm, bold ones. The ones whose fight or flight response isn't on a hair trigger. They're the ones brave enough to get close to our trash cans and all those other resources. And this constant selection for tameness, it's having this totally fascinating side effect. It actually seems to be changing their bodies. And I want to be clear, this is not just a theory. We have hard, measurable data. A recent study looked at almost 20,000 photos and found something specific. City raccoons have snouts that are on average 3.56% shorter than rural raccoons. Now, that might not sound like a huge number, but a shorter snout is a classic sign of what's called domestication syndrome. We see it in dogs and other domesticated animals. It's a huge clue that a really deep biological change is happening. So here's the bottom line. We are literally watching the emergence of what some scientists are calling the uber raccoon. The city version isn't just acting different, it's becoming biologically different. And the truly wild part? It's our own world. The world we built, the Anthropocene, that's accidentally forging them into something smarter, more resourceful, and even tamer. It's this incredible, unintended consequence of our own civilization. Okay, so this whole urban evolution thing is amazing, but it's really only half the picture. To get the full story of their potential, we have to look under the hood, so to speak. We need to look at the incredible brain power that raccoons already have, just baked right into their biology. And this is absolutely critical. See, it's not just about how big the brain is. It's about how many neurons are packed into it, especially in the cerebral cortex. And raccoon brains are dense with neurons. We're talking a level of density that's right up there with dogs and even some primates. This gives them some serious processing power. It's the raw hardware you need for seriously advanced problem solving. And they definitely put that hardware to good use. In some studies, scientists gave raccoons these complex puzzle boxes with food inside. And sure, they've figured out how to get the food. But here's the amazing part. Even after they got the reward, they didn't stop. They kept fiddling with the box, opening other latches, exploring how it worked. It's a behavior called information foraging. Basically, they're driven to solve problems just for the sake of it. It's pure curiosity. And that kind of motivation to just learn, that is a massive sign of a very sophisticated mind.
All right, so they're smart. We've established that. Super smart. But being a genius isn't enough to build a whole civilization, right? You need at least two more key ingredients. First, you've got to be able to actually manipulate the world around you, use tools. And second, you need a social structure, a way to pass down knowledge from one generation to the next. And this right here, this is probably the biggest objection people have. The opposable thumb. I mean, advanced technology, making complex tools, it all seems to depend on that amazing precision grip that we primates have. So how in the world could a raccoon ever get around that massive hurdle? Well, the answer might not be in the thumb. The thing about evolution is that it doesn't always follow the same playbook. It's incredibly clever at finding, workarounds. In fact, evolution has already solved this exact problem twice, actually. If you look at giant pandas and red pandas, you'll see they both developed what's called a false thumb. It's not a true thumb, it's actually an enlarged wrist bone that works like an opposable thumb, helping them grip bamboo. It's a perfect example of what we call convergent evolution, two different species finding the same solution to a similar problem. So, if the pressure was on, if raccoons really needed to get better at using tools, it's totally plausible they could evolve a similar workaround. And what about that second piece, the social structure? Well, it turns out raccoons are anything but loners. They have this really complex social life called a fission-fusion model. That basically means they have a core family unit, usually related females, who team up to raise their kids, but they also have all these other temporary and long-term relationships. And having to navigate that complicated social world, keeping track of who's a friend, who's a rival, who's family, that is the perfect pressure cooker for evolving higher social intelligence. It's exactly what you need to start passing down culture and knowledge. Okay, so raccoons have a lot going for them. But to be fair, they aren't the only ones in the running for this hypothetical crown. And to really appreciate their strengths, it's super helpful to compare them to another top contender, one from a totally different and much, much older branch of the evolutionary tree. I'm talking about cephalopods, specifically animals like the octopus. And let's be real, they are brilliant, no question. They've got big brains, they can solve complex problems, they're incredibly dexterous. But they have two massive fundamental roadblocks. First, their lives are incredibly short. We're talking maybe a year or two. And second, for the most part, they're solitary creatures. And when you put those two things together, it becomes almost impossible to build up a body of knowledge and pass it down through generations. And without that, you can't have culture, you can't have technology. This is where raccoons, with their much longer lifespans and their social networks, have a massive, massive advantage. So where are we going with all this? Let's pull all these threads together for a second. We've got accelerated evolution happening in our cities. We've got the built-in, high-powered cognitive hardware. We have a plausible path to complex tool use. And we have the social framework needed for culture. When you put all that together, you can start to sketch out a future for them. And yeah, it's speculative, but it's a future that's grounded in real science. Some speculative models, which sometimes use the placeholder name Paco, paint a really fascinating picture. Imagine this, a future raccoon species that evolves to walk on two legs, freeing up those amazing hands for full-time tool use. A species that shifts from being nocturnal to being active during the day to tackle more complex projects. One that develops a true structured language and starts forming larger permanent settlements or burrows. Now again, this is pure hypothesis, but it's not random. It's a logical projection based on all the potential and all the pressures we've been talking about. At the end of the day, the story of the raccoon is really a story about incredible adaptability. These guys are the ultimate generalists. They didn't just survive the massive changes we brought to the planet during the Anthropocene. No, they've actually thrived in it. They've turned our world into their own personal evolutionary crucible. And that leaves us with one last pretty provocative question. The next time you see a raccoon jimmying open one of those animal-proof garbage cans, I want you to stop and think about what you're really seeing. Is it just a pest, a trash panda, or are you maybe getting a sneak peek at the exact combination of intelligence, dexterity, and sheer adaptability that could, given enough time, make them the heirs to a world we leave behind?